support and letting it happen in such a way. First of all, before joining the session as for the inaugural process, I would like to thank the Department of English of our college for arranging the web lecture series, more especially Dr. Saurabh Nag, the coordinator, Dr. Nikhilesh Dhar, and the part-time faculty members Kartik Goin, Asim Kumar Betal, Bulti Day. Had they been, I would not have seen it materializing, taking wings. In this time of COVID-19 and its aftermath, when sets of rules and regulations have undergone drastic changes, our definitions and philosophies taking a U-turn, and we trying to cope up with survival strategies, putting emphasis on social distancing, wearing of masks in public places, health and hygiene in order to keep the pandemic under check and balance. How to deal and dispense with is the thing doing the rounds, but we shall try our best to deliver instead of the bad times ever seen in terms of trouble, tribulation, trauma, and crisis management, and the upheavals and repercussions taken place. Had there been not the periods of plague, malaria, cholera, viral fever, typhoid, polio, measles, chickenpox, and delivery deaths. Whatever be that, away from the mind around lockdown, red zone, yellow zone, green zone, and so on, we have tried to arrange for a lecture series which would definitely benefit you, taking your mind to a different pedestal of thinking, warding off the evil, the virus dragon. The last of all, not the least, it is now our time to switch back to the speakers waiting in person to deliver their addresses, lectures, talks, and papers. And in this context, I extend my heartiest felicitations to Dr. Elham Hussain, Dhaka City College, Dhaka, Dr. Himadri Lahiri, the University of Burdwan, Dr. Nivedita Mukherjee, Sidhu Kanu Birsa, University Purulia, Akram Muhammad Ali, L. Elku Zahri, Al Khabd Community College, Al Mahawit, Yaman, Hemant Golapalli, Vidyasagar University, Midnapur, Dr. Arnav Kumar Sinha, the University of Burdwan, Dr. Gautam Buddha Surali, Bankura University, Bankura, Dr. Shreya Bhattacharya, Central University of Jharkhand, Ranchi, Dr. Narendra Ranjan Malas, Ramanand College, Vishnupur, Dr. Nadu Gopal Mukherjee, Bankura Christian College, Bankura, Dr. Tuhin Majumdar, Khatra, Adivasi Mahavidyalaya, Khatra, Dr. Jayati Shankar Mandal, Sidhu Kanu Birsa University, Dr. Pradipta Syam Chaudhary, the University of North Bengal. This much today, respected sirs. Thank you. Thank you very much. Hello.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Audible
Yes,
now.
sir.
We would like, yes, we would request Dr. Elam Hussain to deliver his lecture. Dr. Elam Hussain is a Bangladeshi academic, essayist, translator, editor, and a literary critic. He writes both in Bangla and in English. He has authored 6 books, namely Angst and Anxiety, Colonial Ambivalence, and Africa, Shaitya o Nandon Bhavna, yes, Africa, Literature and Aesthetics are some of his remarkable books. A good number of his research articles have been published in the journals of home and abroad. His field of interest covers South Asian and African literature and culture. At present, he is serving as Associate Professor and Head of the Department of English of Dhaka City College, Dhaka, Bangladesh. So, we would like to invite Dr. Elam Hussain to deliver his lecture. Elamda.
Uh, Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon, sir.
Dr. Ilham Hussain, Assistant Professor of English, from Dhaka City College, Dhaka, Bangladesh. And at first, I like to express my heartfelt gratitude to the Reverend Principal Sir of Sambhagana Vidyalaya, Professor Dr. Vijay Kam Vijay Sir. And I like to thank all the faculty of English department, and I especially thank Dr. Surab Kumar Nag for inviting me to this webinar. I also welcome all the participants to the lecture on the study of Amitabh Ghosh's satellite from the perspective of Bangladesh. Actually, it's my immense pleasure to be a part of your initiative. So I express my gratitude to all. So at the very inception of my lecture, I like to clarify one particular. Literature in English is immensely popular among Bangladeshi readership. A handful of Indian authors who write in English have become a significant part of our curriculums of different universities for the students of honors and master's levels. I like to mention some of the names of some Indian writers, popular Indian writers who write in English. Amitabh Ghosh, Mulk Raj Anand, R.K. Narayan, Jhumpa Lahiri, Arundhati Roy, Bikram Sheth, Salman Rushdie, Arvind Adiga, and many others. These brilliant writers have become a very important part of our readership today in Bangladesh. And many writers who write in Bangla, the writers from West Bengal, are also immensely popular among us. For example, Shamaresh Majumdar, Shirshendu Mukhopadhyay, Abul Bashar, Mohasheta Devi, Shankho Ghosh, and many others. They have become an important part of our readership. Now, I like to say at the very inception of my discussion on Amitabh Ghosh's shadow line, I just like to say why Amitabh Ghosh has become relevant in our country. Amitabh Ghosh is very relevant in Bangladesh because of the wide range of his subject matters that has encompassed cultural crisis, the issues of climate change and its impact on culture. In this connection, I like to mention one of his seminal books. It's a non-fiction. The name of the book is The Great Derangement, Climate Change and the Unthinkable. In this book, Ghosh says that climate change impacts the cultural change. That is, cultural change is closely related to climate change because it causes migration of the people. It also causes diaspora. For that reason, the study of climate change has become a very important part of Amitabh Ghosh's writing. And then another important subject matter that invites the Bangladeshi readers to have a deep reading of Amitabh Ghosh's writing. That is, he invites the readers to reread and rethink our historiography. Just like an archaeologist, as we find in Michel Foucault's Archaeology of Knowledge, Amitabh Ghosh digs deeper into our history and historical events like our colonial experiences, post-colonial response to our history, then Bengal partition of 1905, then Indian partition of 1947, communal riot of 1963-64 in Calcutta and Dhaka, the rise of capitalism So all these important issues have become inevitable parts of the literary works of Amitabh Ghosh. And these issues are also very, very relevant to the Bangladeshi readers and, in broad sense, the readers of the whole world. His study of the realities of the subaltern that we find in his Hungry Tide is also an attraction, is also an important area of thinking for the Bangladeshi readers. And in Hungry Tide, that is one of his seminal novels, we find that he has described the realities of the life of the subaltern living in the adjacent areas of the Sundarbans. So that very study has become a very immensely popular study for the Bangladeshi leadership. Moreover, his works concentrate on the regions adjacent to the Bay of Bengal, the Arabian Sea, and the Indian Ocean. So his narratology offers multifaceted and multi-layered works that can be studied from various perspectives. It can be studied from historical perspective, cultural perspective, ecological perspective. We can analyze his texts eco-critically, and we can also approach his texts from a structuralist point of view. So I have just mentioned these perspectives to show how multifarious or multifaceted writer Amitabh Ghosh is. He really deserves our special attention. Now I like to concentrate on his text, The Shadow Lines. Like his other novels, this fiction produces a narrative which is closely related to the historical realities of the people living in this subcontinent. Actually, Amitabh Ghosh is a master storyteller, and his stories make his readers acquainted with the realities that shape their identity, their nationality, their cultural identity. Actually, in an interview, Ghosh has said, a novel should reflect the reality in which it is written. The task of a novelist is not to produce propaganda. So this very assertion or this very proclamation proves that Amitabh Ghosh is a very conscious writer, a very historically conscious writer, culturally conscious writer, politically conscious writer. We cannot study Amitabh Ghosh alienating him from the issues all around us. In this connection, if I look into The Shadow Lines, I find that here Ghosh has offered a historiography that challenged the colonial historiography of our subcontinent. Actually, we can analyze this text, or we can treat this text as a counter discourse. The discourse that our colonial rulers produced, the discourse with which they misguided us, the discourse with which they sowed the seed of hostility among us, that very discourse is anatomized by Amitabh Ghosh. And to do this job, while doing this job, he has referred to, and he has also critically analyzed the historical realities related to the people of this subcontinent. Actually, the historiography produced by James Mill, Max Muller, and Macaulay sowed the seed of bitter communal violence. Two-nation theory, Bengal partition of 1905, then Indian partition of 1947, and the successive riots in both the parts across the whimsical border. I call this border whimsical because this border was demarcated by a man, Cyril Radcliffe, who had never visited India before 1947. And he did not have the idea of the communal harmony among the people here. He did not know how district is constructed in our country, how thana is formed in our area. He did not have the slightest ideas of all these things. But he was appointed to demarcate the borders on the basis of the religious demography. And he did this job. He completed this job only in, it is said that only in 7 weeks. Sitting in a room, he whimsically demarcated the borders, and he made millions of people refugees overnight. Millions of people became rootless overnight. And all these things, all these arbitrary activities of the colonizers sowed the permanent seed of communal violence, which still very often challenges our cultural identity. I think this very historical reality has been incorporated in the shadow lines of Amitav Ghosh. It's a story of 2 families. I just like to throw some light on the story of this text in brief. So we find 2 families here. Thamma's family or Thakurma's family living in Calcutta, and her sister Maya Devi, who was the wife of Mr. Datta Chaudhary, Justice Datta Chaudhary, and at one phase of their life they went to London, and there they developed intimacy with an English family, that is Price family. And Thamma's Jethamashai lives in Dhaka, the then East Bengal or East Pakistan. The story of the novel develops in a non-linear fashion through an excellent narratology emanating from a narrator who is a minor boy. His name is not mentioned in this text. He has learned to imagine a broader world from his uncle Tridi, who is killed in a riot in Dhaka in 1964. So after the killing of Tridi, the reaction that Thamma exhibits can invite the readers to explore the historical realities that have challenged the identity of Thamma. If we analyze Thamma's character from new historicist perspective or from the contextual perspective, then it is found that she was born in Dhaka in 1902. That is, she was born in Dhaka, and at that time it was East Bengal. Afterwards, she settled in Calcutta, and she was desperately trying to liberate the country. That is, she even decided to join the terrorist groups to fight against the British colonizers. So she was desperate for liberty. But after liberty in 1947, she still, to her dismay, finds that communal violence is corrosively challenging our identity. She attempts to bring things together. So she went to Dhaka in 1964, along with Tridib, that is her sister's son, then May Price, beloved of Tridib, Maya Devi, Tridib's mother, to bring her Jathamashai back to Calcutta. But in the surge of communal riot, Tridib and 90 years old Jathamashai were killed. And another person, actually Amitabh Ghosh has very tactfully chosen this character from subaltern group, that is Khalil, a rickshaw puller, who looks after Jathamashai in his old age. This rickshaw puller was also killed in the riot. So now, what was the reaction of Thamma after this tragic incident? Thamma, out of fury, decides to sell her beloved gold chain and donate the money to fight against the Muslims. I think Thamma's character deserves intensive exploration to understand the mind of the people living in this area or in these areas. And it will also help us understand psychology, then identity, the conception of nation state, culture. So these important issues deserve attention, while we will concentrate on the analysis of the character of Thamma. And all these things that we find in this text, all these things, all these issues that are presented in these texts, are not accidental issues, or are not, these incidents did not take place overnight. Actually, as I have already mentioned, that archaeology of knowledge. So if we dig deeper into the history, if we dig deeper into these realities, then we will go back to our historiography. And in this connection, I like to mention Homike Bhabha's famous book, Location of Culture. In that very book, Bhabha has said, colonialism affects the culture and identity of the natives. And colonialism also makes the natives sway between belonging and citizenship. To lend weight to this view, let us look back to our history. Before the advent of colonialism, religious faiths or religious doctrines did not work as a political drive, or did not work in very extremely in political activities in India. The Hindus and Muslims worked side by side. Accommodation of differences is a typical characteristic of India. So India is great because India accommodates differences. India is proud of its greatness. Its greatness lies in its accommodative tendency or attitude. India accommodates differences. And Swami Vivekananda has declared in the World Parliament Religion in Chicago that acceptance of difference was central to the Indian experience throughout its long civilizational history. So mutual cooperation, brotherhood, amity, affinity. These are the characteristics of Indian people. Indian people are not originally hostile to one another. The affinity between the Hindus and Muslims constructed a syncretic culture in India. Muslim poets, musicians, and singers wrote or sang Hindu devotional songs. And we may refer to Kazi Nazrul Islam, who has written also Shama Sangit. And Hindus also visited, or they also thronged Sufi shrines of Muslims. So soldiers, suppose Muslim soldiers, under the Maratha leader Shivaji, and many Hindu soldiers fought even under the extremely Islamist ruler Aurangzeb. So there are hundreds of examples of Hindu-Muslim amity, Hindu-Muslim affinity in India. But large-scale conflicts between Hindus and Muslims began only under colonial rule. And Shashi Tharoor, in his book, An Era of Darkness, he has mentioned it also, that large-scale conflicts between Hindus and Muslims began only under colonial rule. Now, how and why? The answer is not hard to seek. Even in 1857, the Hindu and Muslim soldiers rebelled against British Raj unitedly. The Hindus and Muslims, Hindu soldiers and Muslim soldiers revolted against British Raj unitedly. And that was a cause of headache for the British rulers. In 1857, Lord Elphinstone, the British governor of Bombay, told London that they would practice divide and rule policy in India. They would practice divide and rule policy in India. Actually, divide and rule policy was at first introduced by King Philip, that is Alexander the Great's father. And the British borrowed that very maxim and they applied here in India. A few decades later, of 1857 rebellion, that was a rebellion, and that was the first revolt for our independence in this subcontinent. But the British historiography has marked it, labeled it as a mutiny, that is Sepoy mutiny. Actually, branding, naming, labeling, it's a colonial politics to suppress or exercise hegemony upon the natives of a locality. So we were also the victim of that deliberate politics of British colonizers. They branded that very significant episode of our history as a mere Sepoy mutiny. Actually, that was the first revolt for independence. Anyway, a few decades later, Sir John Strachey said the existence of hostile creeds among the Indian people would fortify the political position of the British Raj in India. Now, this hostility among the creeds was also a construction of deliberate project of Warren Hastings, who was the first de facto Governor General of India. Warren Hastings. In 1774, he took the charge of this position. He hired then 11 Pandits and asked them to develop the ordinations of the Pandits. Actually, his purpose was to divide the Hindus deliberately by using their own traditional texts and scriptures. Hastings was successful in introducing hierarchy in Hindu society and set them against one another. So Hastings very deliberately brought all these things together, and he put one section of people against another section of people, people of one religion against people of another religion. So that was a deliberate project of colonial enterprise. The colonial policy kept the Muslims out of the narratives of India. Colonial historiography divided Indian history into Hindu rule, Muslim rule, and British rule. Thus deliberately put these two major groups of people against each other. That is, Hindus against Muslims, Muslims against Hindus. Actually, this colonial historiography sowed the seed of two nations theory also. So two nations theory was not an accidental invention of Muhammad Ali Jinnah. Actually, it emanated from history. And if we, just like archaeologists, explore or dig deeper into our history, then we find how this two-nation theory came to Jinnah through different incidents, realities. So two-nation theory was evolutionized, and it had got a long history. And finally, and we know that even in 1905, the Bengal was divided by Lord Curzon. Actually, he had a lame subterfuge. His subterfuge was that it was done for administrative purpose, so that they can run the administration easily. But actually, their purpose was to divide the Bengalis who were very much conscious of their rights, who responded to the British colonial exploitation, who at different phases of history became united and raised their voice against colonial oppression. Actually, it was the British purpose, it was their purpose to weaken that very voice, that very stamina. So they deliberately divided Bengal in 1905. And Lord Curzon did it. And finally, in 1947, India was divided on the basis of religious demography, which is still a fatal blow on the cultural unity. The seed of bitterness which was sowed in 1947 germinated successively in the form of a poisonous tree of communal violence or riots. One of such corrosive riots has been depicted as a major incident in the Shadow Lines. The ethnic cleansing violence started in Dhaka and Calcutta, and at that time, the sacred hair of Prophet Muhammad was stolen from Hazrat Bal Shrine of Srinagar. And on the basis of this particular incident, there was a violent riot in Dhaka and in Calcutta. And at that time, we know that Ayub Khan, who was the president of Pakistan of that time, instigated that very violence. He came to Dhaka, and while he was leaving for Islamabad in Dhaka airport, he declared that he would not to be blamed for the reaction to that incident. That is, whatever the people of East Pakistan would do, for those, he would not to be blamed. So actually, he speaks like a inheritor of colonial legacy. Actually, he infuriated the people. And at that time, many unwanted things happened here. Muslims grabbed the land, the houses of Hindus. They looted, plundered the business or shops or business institutions or organizations of Hindus. Even the politicians who at that time held important positions in the government, also they also got involved in this looting and plundering of the property of Hindus. I like to mention a name, Abdul Sabur Khan, who was the communication minister of Pakistan at that time in 1964. He also grabbed 3 bighas of land of a Hindu merchant living in Khulna. His name was Rupchand Biswas. So he grabbed 3 bighas of land of that very Hindu merchant. Not only that, he also built a 2-storied building on that land. And then Rupchand Biswas went to the court and he won the prosecution. And the court ordered Abdul Sabur Khan to pay compensation of the amount of 1,35,000 rupees. So, in such a very crucial situation, or in such a very predicament, our novels, one of the protagonists, that is Thamma, came to Dhaka to take her Jathamashai back to Calcutta. But tragically, Tridib, that is her sister's son, and Jathamashai of Thamma, who was a man of above 90 years, and a rickshaw puller named Khalil, who looks after Jathamashai, were killed in the riot. I like to say that Amitabh Ghosh has invited his readers to reread and rethink about his historiography. And through investigation of our historiography, will reveal the factors responsible for communal violence and our identity crisis, cultural crisis. The rereading of the colonial historiography also reveals that we find in Ranajit Guha's famous book, Dominance Without Hegemony. In that very book, Ranajit Guha has said that the British colonizers did never want to construct nation state in India. That they did in Europe. Actually, their form of dominance, their form of ruling in this subcontinent was different from their government system in Europe. They did never want that India should develop as a nation state, or India should develop a well-organized government system. They did never want it. They did never want that the people living in this subcontinent should be made citizens. Their project was to transform the people of India into subjects, not citizens, but subjects. And they did it with a deliberate purpose of dividing the people on the basis of their religious ideologies, on the basis of their castes and creeds. And behind that very project, they had the only purpose of accumulating capital. We know it. And they did it very successfully. They retarded our nationalism and instigated xenophobia and disintegration among the natives, from which we are still suffering. This colonial project has put shadow lines in the form of arbitrary cartographic demarcations, communal or ideological differences, mutual hatred and violence. It dislocates millions of people like Thamma, who has no home. If we critically analyze Thamma's character, she seems to be an entity swaying between the sense of belonging and nationality. She was born in Dhaka, and in her old age, she comes back to Dhaka, and she gathers a very bitter experience. She falls victim to communal riot, and then she again goes back to Calcutta, and she cherishes hatred for the Muslims. So this divided self, the self which is divided between sense of belonging and nationality, actually all these things are the creation of colonial historiography. So these shadow lines have created socio-cultural differences across nations. A space is created between nations that discover, like the narrator of this novel. The narrator of this novel says at one point, I like to quote him. He says, the narrator says, I believed in the reality of space. I believed that distance separates, that it is corporeal substance. I believed in the reality of nations and borders. I believed across the borders there existed another reality. The only relationship my vocabulary permitted between those separate realities was war or friendship. So I like to conclude with my emphasis on the word friendship, which in association with the openness or broadness of our minds can help us overcome shadow lines and live in close to each other with all differences. We have our differences. We have differences of our ideologies. We have differences of our geographical location. But still we are brothers. But still we are one. We are one in our spirit. We are one. We can achieve this oneness with the broadness of our mind, with the openness of our mind. I think this is the message that Amitabh Ghosh has put in this very text. So I like to stop here. Once again, I thank the organizer of this webinar and giving me an opportunity to be a part of you. I also express my gratitude to all the listeners who patiently listen to me till now. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Hello. Actually, I was muted. Thank you, Alamda, for such an incisive discussion of Ghosh's The Shadow Lines. Your lecture ranges from Jinha to Guha, from the two-nation theory to the post-nation theories, or beyond that. Our next speaker is Professor Himadri Lahiri, and I was fortunate enough to join his classes as a student at the University of Burdwan. He is the former professor, Department of English and Culture Studies, University of Burdwan, West Bengal. Currently, he is a professor of English at the School of Humanities, Netaji Subhash Open University, Kolkata. He has written extensively on diaspora studies, post-colonial studies, and Indian English literature. His latest publication is Diaspora Theory and Transnationalism, which was published by Orient Black Swan in 2019. Contemporary English, Indian English Poetry and Drama, that was published by the Cambridge Scholars in 2019. And it was a co-edited book. It was co-edited by him. So I would like to request Professor Himadri Lahiri to deliver his lecture. Sir, please. And after his lecture, the floor will be open for discussion. If the audience, any of you happens to have some question or some suggestion, some discussion, anything, we shall do it after the second lecture is delivered. So I would like to request Professor Himadri Lahiri to deliver his lecture. Sir, please.
Can you see me and hear me?
Yes, sir, you are audible.
Uh, I think I can begin my lecture. Sure. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay. So good afternoon, everyone. You have already come across the title of my lecture, and you will find two important points there, two important foci there. Number one is Coolie diaspora, and the second one is historiography. Interestingly, you know that Coolie diaspora is something about which we do not know much. There was a diaspora in the 19th century and early 20th century, but we are in our academia basically obsessed with the post-colonial diaspora, and therefore what happens is that our focus is entirely on that, and the Coolie diaspora remains relatively unknown, basically in literature departments. Social science departments have already started discussing Coolie diaspora, and there are quite a good number of books on Coolie diaspora. But then in literature, we have taken up the issue only very recently. In India, I mean, in Fiji or in Caribbean islands or in the US, you will find quite a good corpus of critical works already done. So today's focus of my lecture is on Coolie diaspora. But then because it is relatively unknown, what I would like to point out that the historiography also comes in a big way, because we have to retrieve that history. And the retrieval of the history is very important. The question is how to retrieve the history. This is a very important question that social scientists and literary artists have been engaged in doing. They are engaged in unearthing the past history, because you know that in the archives not many materials are available. Neither are accounts of the Coolie diaspora in written forms. The basic reason is that the coolies, they were the subalterns, they were mostly uneducated. They were not, most of them, not able to put their experience in words. And therefore, what remains is a big silence. And contemporary writers have been trying to unearth that silence. But you will find that in many of the writings, and I will refer to some of the writings later, you will find that there are different points of view in unearthing the history, the blasting the silence, revealing whatever can be retrieved. So the question of historiography also becomes very important. One important historiography is the feminist historiography. That has been resorted to by historians like Gayatri Bahadur and literary artists, many literary artists. Peggy Mohan is one such artist. I will come to that later on. But then you see that why do we call it coolie diaspora? The first thing that we should keep in mind is that in 1834, slavery was officially abolished. Okay, but what happened is that the capitalist ventures, different plantations in different colonies, and many other places needed people to work in the fields, work in the plantations, and therefore what was needed that a fresh number of migrants are needed. Okay, coolies replaced the African, the people who came from Africa, who were turned into slaves and who worked in the plantations, who worked in many other places. Now that slavery was undone, it was no more there, officially speaking. So you need a fresh group of people who can replace the slaves, the African slaves. And therefore, a new system of slavery, and the word slavery is problematical. It is a contested word because officially this was not a slavery. It was a kind of agreement that was signed between the coolies and the plantation owners and the people who were actually agents who sent the coolies to different plantation centers in Fiji, in Caribbean islands, in Mauritius, in Suriname, in many other places, in South Africa, for example. So these people who came from Uttar Pradesh, what we know as Uttar Pradesh or Bihar, or areas like that, there were some coolies from the south as well, but the main focus, the main corpus actually came from the main number, the vast numbers actually came from the north of India. So these people were derogatively called coolies, and these people were actually transported from different centers in India, like Varanasi, for example, to Kolkata by train, and then they were shipped off to different centers. Now, you see that it also raises the question of modernity. These people who didn't have any idea about modernity, who were mainly scooped up in villages, remote villages, who didn't have any idea about modern technology. These people suddenly came across the new kinds of modernity, the new forms of modernity, for example, the train. So the train transported them. Any problem? Any problem in audio?
No,
No, sir.
Okay.
No, sir.
Okay. So what happened that they were transported to Calcutta, and then from there they were shipped off. So So Calcutta became a very important center of the migration. And interestingly, we do not know much about this transportation history until some people, mainly the descendants of the indentured laborers, who came forward and established many they initiated many efforts, and because of their efforts, we have come to know about this venture more widely than ever before. Recently, I was fortunate enough, I was invited to speak in Garden Reach, in a Garden Reach seminar organized by Calcutta Port Trust, who were actually celebrating some kind 100 years, 150 years of the port. And therefore, you see, there I was fortunate enough to see the places and the archive which are kept there. But these things remain largely unknown to us, most of us. And therefore, I prefer to speak on this aspect of Coolie diaspora, and so that we can have some discussions, some dialogues in future. We can write about them, we can read the texts properly, and then we can also have some discourses on them. We can think of these writings from different perspectives, literary perspectives and social scientist perspectives, etc., etc. Now, one thing is that this Coolie diaspora, it has two other nomenclatures as well. For example, it was widely known as indentured laborers movement. This is the name that is widely used, but Coolie diaspora is also very well known. The Coolie is a term which actually is a derogatory term, and the Shaheeds, the Englishmen, they use this term derogatively to refer to this mass of men and women who were shipped off to different plantation centers. So indentured diaspora is one term which is widely used, but there is also another term, and this term is the Girmitia diaspora. Interestingly, you know that Girmitia is a term which comes from the word agreement. Okay, these coolies and the people who are illiterate, who didn't know much about their journeys, the destinations and reasons, these people were made to sign an agreement, and these people couldn't properly pronounce the word agreement, and therefore Girmitia is a corrupt form of agreement, and it has come to this same diaspora is also known as Girmit diaspora, and the people who went there, they are known as Girmitias. Interestingly, Girmitias the word has been taken, even the Coolie word has been taken in a very positive manner by the coolies, by the erstwhile indentured laborers. Because, you know, it celebrates the kind of pioneering roles they played during the colonial period, and the kind of resilience, valor they needed. It celebrates, these words actually celebrates that kind of attitude. And the descendants of the Coolie diaspora, they also come in a big way to celebrate the events, and they have been, since the Coolie diaspora started more or less in 1837, you see, these people have been trying to project the various dimensions of Coolie diaspora through different media and through different institutions. Now you see that the colonial, the one important question may be, why is it that the people, the coolies, left their places and left for unknown regions? Because they had to cross the Kalapani, the Black Waters, which was an area not to be transcended. That was according to the Hindu philosophy, according to the Hindu religion. So why is it that the forbidden zone of the sea, the black water, the Kalapani, these people prefer to actually to be shipped off across the Kalapanis? That's the big question. So it naturally keeps our focus on the Indian situation during the 19th century and the 20th century. So these people, India was a country which suffered very much from poverty, and because of poverty, families migrated from one place to another within India itself. There are many families where, in which the husband figure, they migrated to other places, and the wives remained in families, wives and other members of their families. So poverty is one reason. Second reason is the Shoti Daho Protha, the Sati. Many women, they wanted to escape Sati, and they preferred to go to Calcutta and then join the Coolie diaspora. And so you see, even after the abolition of Shoti Daho Protha, or the Sati rights, what happened that the situation was such in many families in the rural India that the widows and the women who couldn't produce male children, they were forced to leave their families because of the tortures inflicted on them by their families. So for various reasons, the patriarchal oppressions and many colonial oppressive measures, many people actually left their places, their villages, their homes, and preferred to go to different plantation centers. They became coolies. I will like to remind you of Amitabh Ghosh's Sea Poppies. The earlier lecture was on Amitabh Ghosh, and you can connect this, how Amitabh Ghosh can shift from one subject to another. Sea Poppies is one example of the Coolie diaspora. You will find reflections of Coolie diaspora in a very elaborate manner. He has done lots of researches. Almost all his books are based on researches, and he has done lots of researches in this area and wrote Sea Poppies. You will find characters like Diti and Kalua, for example. Those of you who have already gone through the text, you will identify these two names. Diti fled Sati. Okay, Diti's husband died, and he was saved by Kalua, who belonged to a lower caste family, and therefore both of them fled the society and joined the Coolie diaspora. There are many other kinds of figures. For example, you will find Jamindar Neel Ratan Hallar. He was forced to leave the Coolie, forced to leave. His property was taken off through a judicial means, and he was forced to join this Coolie diaspora. So you can easily find out that it is because of the many reasons, like widowhood, like patriarchal tortures, like colonial repressive measures, like poverty, like drought. Many people, they left their places willingly for the Coolie diaspora. But there were also many people, especially women, who were trapped by agents and sub-agents of the transporting authorities, who are known as Arkatis. So you see that these huge mass of people ultimately assembled at Garden Reach Depot, and as soon as they assembled in that depot, they lost their they had to forsake their older identity and they had to assume new identities. They knew that their older identities must be actually forsaken now, and a new journey must be undertaken. Now, I would like to read two quotations from Brij Bilal, who had a wonderful book, The Other Side of Midnight. So from this book, I will read two quotations. Number one quotation is, children of the Gilmid diaspora have rescued the indentured experience from the remote and reviled fringes of modern historiography and given the Gilmitians, once regarded as the stepchildren of lesser gods, voice, agency, and humanity. So many of these coolies had actually taken new names, and many of the coolies, many of them were Brahmins, for example, and they actually forsook their sacred threads in the water of the Ganges and took new names. And you see that this was an experience, transformative experiences, which is something which we should study, because as soon as they boarded the Jahaj, the ship, they became Jahaji Bhais and Jahaji Bahins. If you read Amitabh Ghosh's Sea of Poppies, you will find that in the ship, in the Bajra, actually one kind of schooner, which there the women are talking about the fact that they have already become Jahaji Bahins. So they were already forming a kind of a platform from where they can form families and communities, new communities in the new lands. So from that point of view, it was a novel experience. Why do I choose this area for today's lecture? I will read another quotation from Brij Bilal. There was no written history about them, just some hearsay, memories, a collage of conflicting testimonies about a past that seemed remote and irrelevant. I wanted to revisit the vanishing past. So for the descendants, what happened is that this journey, which has been called Odyssey by Gayatri Bahadur in her book, Coolie Omen, you see, this became a very important point of focus for historians and literary historians, literary artists. So since there was almost no stories available either in the archives or any written document, archives were very poorly maintained, and therefore the stories had to be retrieved through different means. Archive was obviously one such means, but then there were other means also, very important means. I'm coming to that. But you see that whatever I cannot, during this during this period, limited period, I cannot go to any text in particular. I have just referred to Amitabh Ghosh, who was not a descendant of this Coolie diaspora. But there are quite a good number of writings now who actually resorted to new historiography. The new historiography that I am talking of. Who are these writers? You know of V.S. Naipaul, who actually wrote mostly in the older fashion, and he did not actually resort to the new historiographical methods. But there are, for example, Ramabai Espinet, one important writer who has written The Swinging Bridge, published in 2003. Gayatri Bahadur, I have already mentioned. Her Coolie Omen is equally very well known and is being discussed right now in different on different forums, which was published in 2013. Brijvilal's The Other Side of Midnight, which was published in 2003. Peggy Mohan's Jahajins, which was published by HarperCollins. The year I have forgotten. It was probably sometime around 2013 or 14. I'm not very sure. But interestingly, very interestingly, in 2018, an anthology has been published, and this anthology is known as We Mark Your Memory, which is a collection of different kind of oral stories, reminiscences, hearsays, poems, etc., which was edited by David Devidin. It was published in 2018 by School of Advanced Study, University of London. You can easily see the involvement of the academia in this search, and this can also be found in Peggy Mohan's Jahajins. The character who is unearthing the past, trying to unearth the past, is a linguist who is a research scholar, and he's trying to find out the kind of Bhojpuri language that persists in the diaspora and what kind of differences they have with the Bhojpuri of India, spoken in India. So this kind of a new historiography is very interesting in the sense that all these books actually go forward and backward in time. They start in the present time, but then they go backward and then come forward again to the present time. And therefore, there is a to and forth journey in these kinds of narratives. Why is it so? Because there is absolutely no material, very few materials available in the archives. And the first generation, the coolies, the original coolies, they are passing away. They are vanishing from the faces of the earth. And therefore, the artists, the social scientists, the literary writers, they are all focusing on, they are taking interviews, they are going to these people, and they are actually collecting materials, interviews, and other kinds of hearsays, stories that are in circulation, etc., etc. So it is a matter of methodology as well, and these methodologies actually are very important in the sense that, for example, one prominent source is the archive. So archival methodology is pursued here. But then you cannot depend on archives. Gayatri Bahadur couldn't depend on archive. Peggy Mohan couldn't depend on archive. Or other writers like Espinet, Ramabai Espinet, couldn't depend on archives because archives couldn't properly give them materials. So what did they do? They took help of what Brijvilal calls faction. Faction is a portmanteau word which is which is combined with the two words fiction and faction. Faction and fiction. So you combine both fact and fiction. So fiction, why fiction? Especially, you will find that these kinds of narratives, Peggy Mohan's narratives, or Gayatri Bahadur's narratives, Coolie Oman, there are materials which were found, but there are vast areas of silence. So this silence can only be approached if you have imagination. So through imagination, through interviews, through your interactions with the members of the diaspora families, you have to collect information. And there are, even then, when you collect information, there remains gaps. And how can you fill up the gaps? You can only fill up the gaps with the help of imagination. So imagination plays a very important role here, and it is not actually seen in an unfavorable manner. Oral methodologies therefore comes handy here in this kind of writing. And as a historian, Gaitra Bahadur takes help of this kind of uh, methodology, and therefore, and as a historian, you see, Bridge Villal takes help of this methodology. They go to the songs, for example, songs called Videshia, which are even now sung in Bihar and Uttar Pradesh and many other areas. Videshiyas are songs which lament the loss of the family member who have gone to different places and cannot be found again. They have not returned. So, with the help of these materials available, the writers, fiction writers, they build up narratives, they build up the history of Kuli narratives. So from that point of view, they do not only remain static in their immigration society or immigrant society, but they also visit India from where which is the point of genesis for them. So going to India, uh, is considered to be a pilgrimage. Brij Bilal calls it a pilgrimage. Gayatri Bahadur calls it a pilgrimage. It is a pilgrimage in order to establish your own identity. The writers want to confirm their own identity. Unless and until they know who they are, where they come from, they cannot establish they cannot remain satisfied. So they visited their old places, India, not that they were very happy, because the old village, when they heard about Gayatri Bahadur's great grandmother's migration, they were very skeptical. They were angry. Why is it that a girl in the 19th century, they left the place, the village, because she violated the norms of patriarchy. So why is it that she should leave? So Gayatri Bahadur's experience was not very pleasant when she visited the village twice. Okay, and the same experience was also faced by Brij Villal. So you see that despite these kinds of actually experiences, these visits are considered very important, because unless and until you go to India, your journey is not complete. So faction is very important historiography in this respect. And faction, since faction is something which makes you go to India in order to fill up the gaps, revisiting India also becomes a very sacred duty. So from that point of view, these writings are wonderful writings, and this corpus, we need to go to this corpus. Otherwise, this quasi-fictional means of expression would not have been possible unless and until you go through such methodologies. I think my time is probably over, and I should stop here. Thank you very much for your patience. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, sir. You strike the keynote of the lecture series with your groundbreaking discussion of Coolie diaspora. And I was getting quite nostalgic, because constantly the memories of attending your classes. Samostri is also present here, so I hope that she is feeling the same. So actually, we are now in the last phase of our web lecture, and it is the floor is now open to all. I request the audience, if you have any suggestion, if you have any question, any doubts to clear. So now the floor is open. So you can unmute yourself, ask the question or give the suggestion and then mute yourself. And I request everyone to turn your cameras on so that we may take some screenshot for newspaper reports. So you may ask question or any suggestion. Let me inform you one thing. Dr. Elham Hossein has to leave. He has sent me a mail that he has some urgent engagement and that's why he couldn't stay with us for the second session. So the floor is open only for the second session now. Since the presenter is not with us, we cannot ask any question. So if you have any question, any queries or any suggestion, so you may please proceed.
Hello, sir. Good afternoon, everyone. Sir, I'm Shankar Subra Chaudhary from Mandatana Mahavidyalaya 6th semester. Sir, can you please light us on the change of coolie diaspora from the indentureship to the from the indentureship to the post-colonial or to the transnational communities? The change of coolie diaspora from indentureship to the transnational communities and the unbearable dialects between the exploitations and liberations of the sufferers.
I do not exactly get the question. Are you asking the differences between the old diaspora, the coolie diaspora, and how it shifted on to the new diaspora, which is the transnational
Community.
post-colonial diaspora? This kind of question, I don't
Yes.
exactly get the shift you say, or the differences.
The shift from the indentureship to the transnational community.
Achha. I'm not sure whether I have understood the question properly, you see, but then let me try to guess and answer. But the question actually raises two basic issues actually. Number one, the coolie diaspora who were originally rooted in the homeland, and then the transnational diaspora, they became transnational communities. Although the transnational community, the term has come up very recently, it was not usually used at that time. So you see that interestingly, this diaspora, the basic diaspora, the basic point is that this diaspora belongs to the subaltern. This is a subaltern diaspora. This is a diaspora of mainly the low caste people. There were Brahmins as well, but then the Brahmins had to give up their identity, okay, the caste identity. And this diaspora was transformative. Okay, the Jahaj itself, the ship itself, was the site of transformation. You know that untouchability was very much persistent in Indian society in 19th century and early 20th century. But when all people come together and they do not, they touch each other, they become Jahaji Bhais and Jahaji Bahins, okay? And they form a kind of friendship, and they build up a platform from where the family formation and the community formation started. Okay, and after landing in the plantation economies, what happened there also, despite their depressions, despite the tortures, despite everything, after the end of the first term of indenture, which was 5 years, many of them came back to indenture again, but then many of them also preferred not to join the indenture and settled in Mauritius, Caribbean islands, etc., etc. Okay, so gradually a new form of transnational community began to grow there. But please mind that this community was transformed in the sense that they did not obey, they didn't pay loyalty to the old patriarchal rules, initially at least, and all kinds of people, irrespective of their class and caste, came together and became one family, Jahaji Bhais and Jahaji Bahins. But in contrast to that, the post-colonial diaspora, the transnational diaspora, is interestingly quite different. These people do not belong to the lower caste people or lower class people. They are middle class people, and many of them belong to the higher classes as well, upper middle class and aristocratic classes. These people are jocularly often called cyber coolies. Okay, they are called cyber coolies, keeping in mind their professions. So you see, the basic difference is very, very clear. This diaspora was the diaspora of the common people, poor people, who were forced to leave their lands. So there was a coercion there. But the new diaspora, the post-colonial transnational diaspora, is basically a diaspora of middle-class people and upper middle-class people. So this is the basic diaspora. These are called coolies, and these are called, the new diaspora people are called, cyber coolies. So this is basically the main difference between the two diasporas. I hope I have answered you. Any other question?
Sir, this is Arnold.
Please.
So I don't think I need. Hi, sir. So I don't think I need to introduce myself. Anyway, sir, as you have rightly pointed out that regarding archives, we are not sure whether these archives provide any kind of information. And when we go through Peggy Mohan's Jahaji, we find that she is quite skeptical about the nature of these archives, and she even says that even it's a character who finds that in the archive that has been created, it's all about the linguistics or the language spoken by the men. The female voice is totally absent, or the female language is totally absent from these archives. So that is true, meaning the politics of archiving does play a very, very significant role. But as you said that factions are dependable, and factions. I've gone through Brij Bilal's The Other Side of Midnight, and factions, as we all know, they are partly fictional and partly based on facts. So then my question is, sir, can we also, in a sense, entirely depend on these factions, because we don't know how much of fiction and how much of facts have been mixed in that way to create these kinds of texts. So are they completely dependable? That is the point which I want to in a sense ask you, or I want to know your response.
Hello, sir. You are muted. Hello, Himadri, sir. You are muted, sir. Please unmute yourself. Hello,
Sir,
sir.
বোধহয় ভুল করে মিউট করে ফেলেছেন স্যার।
Hello.
Is it okay? Is it
now
okay?
it's okay, sir. Yes, now it's okay.
Now it's okay, sir.
So your question is very intelligent question, but I would ask you to consider these questions from 2 points of view, because 2 disciplinary points of view. Number 1, the social scientist's point of view, and number 2, literary artist's point of view. Now, you see that in social sciences like history, for example, and the 2 books I have mentioned, the 2 authors I have mentioned are historians. For them, it was very, very difficult to actually build up the narrative. History is also a narrative. So building up the narrative is very important. So in history, for example, the main question that goes round is the question of authenticity. Okay, so how much authenticity can you guarantee through this method? That comes, your question comes to that from the historical point, from the point of view of the historians. Okay, but then you see, I can't really answer this question because there is what people today say, the critics today say, that the nature of authenticity itself is problematical. So you see the way the actually archive builds up narratives, the history books which are written on the basis of narratives, the narratives which are actually provided by written documents, archival documents, and all other documents which are usually taken as authentic. This these historians basically depend on that, but in the process they also live out the lives as they were lived at one point of time. So in order to guess what kind of lives they actually lived, you have to have access to imagination. So from that point of view, the historian's point of view of authenticity was limited. Okay, so that is why the new historians, many of them are taking help of literature. They are taking help of the oral narratives. And oral narratives have come up, for example, in the building up of the partition narratives these days. Material memory has come to play a big role. Material memory in the sense of it means, as you know, for example, I have an ornament, old ornament. So the descendant is taken back to the grandfather or the grandmother or anybody else. So any kind of material object can take you back to that time, and that gives you some kind of idea about what the time was like. Okay, so this kind of materials we need to access as well. So history was incomplete. History is incomplete without this kind of access, and therefore. From the point of view of historian, of course, both kinds of perspective should be taken into account. And from the point of view of the literary artists like fiction writers, it is easier. Okay, they have to imagine a story. They have to build up a narrative. But then this narrative is based on something which is there and which is not there. Okay, which is there because you are part of that society, you are part of that community, so it is there, but it is not there simply because you do not know what happened in the seas, what happened in the other part of the seas. Okay, what happened in India, for example. Why is it your grandfather or grandmother or great grandfather or great grandmother kind of experiences did you come across? So are you what you are? Are you a Brahmin? Now, right now, you are not a Brahmin, for example, you are Kshatriya. So are you really a Kshatriya? Or in the beginning, were you really a Brahmin? So your identity is not established from that point of view. So literary artists also were a kind of historians. Okay, they were historians in the sense that they took help of the oral narratives that is in currency in the community and in the family, and they took help of the family heirloom. Okay, what kind of material memory they can find there. So from that they built up the narratives. So from that point of view, it is wonderful, and it also establishes a kind of authenticity. Okay, not authenticity in the sense of the historians, the mainstream historian, but authenticity nevertheless. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Any other question? Sometimes coolie does.
Any other question or any suggestion from anyone?
There is, I think there is a question, something like transnational diaspora is also coolie diaspora. It is certainly a coolie diaspora because if you take the word transnational in the original, in the etymological sense of the term, it is a diaspora that transcends the place, the nation, the country. So from that point of view, it is a transnational diaspora. But transnationalism is being used today in a different sense, especially by the social scientists. Okay, so from that point of view, it was not exactly a transnational diaspora, but then we cannot say in precise terms that it was not transnational diaspora, because the play of the capital was very much evident there. It was also a capitalist venture. So from that point of view, there was organized. These were the activities organized by the organized capitalism. So it was certainly a capitalist, is a transnational diaspora, but in a bit different sense. Any other question? This was basically about the lives of the coolies. If you think of the coolie diaspora, it started at about 1837 and ended at about 1937 or something like that. I am not very precise in mentioning the date, but during this period, it was mainly the coolies who went to the plantations, okay, plantation site. So it is overwhelmingly a coolie diaspora. There were some people, businessmen, for example, or some other people who went there in order to see to the systems, the infrastructure, etc., technicians. They went there. So there were some people, but they were part of the colonial venture. They worked on the part of the colonial masters, and some were independent businessmen. So it was overwhelmingly a coolie diaspora, no doubt about that. Any other question? If time permits.
No, sir. There's enough time. Is there any other question?
Yes, as someone put question, wage laborers are also moving usually to the Arab countries, and at one point of time, coolie diaspora also sent a good number of coolies to the Southeast Asian countries. Okay, so you are right in saying that there is a different kind of diaspora which has not come into focus these days. For example, the wage earners who are sent to the Arab countries, for example, for a short period of time or a longer period of time, they are not much discussed. Yes, in a sense, they are also coolie. If you actually use the word coolie in a much more reflective, much more wider sense, much wider sense. You are right, they are coolies, no doubt about that. Okay, but we are basically concerned about the post-colonial middle-class diaspora who leave India on their own volition. Okay, they were not coerced. Okay, and these people were. Some people say that for Hugh King, many historians. They call that this was coolie diaspora of the 19th century or early 20th century, were a new form of slave diaspora. Okay, it was officially not a slave diaspora, but it was also called slave diaspora because the conditions, as you find it there, actually was reminiscent of the coolie diaspora. After landing in the new plantation centers, the coolies were, for example, kept in the houses and the depots, which were originally meant for the slaves, the African slaves. So many people also compare this with Middle Passage, African laborers' Middle Passage. They are also called. So there are controversies about that, but it was not officially a slave diaspora.
Sir, I think there is a question posted in the chat box.
What is the question?
The relevance of retrieving the lost languages of the laborers by the third and fourth generation descendants. Is it a tool of identity negotiation or some linguistic value lies here too? And the question was posted by Yasmin from West Bengal.
So it's of course it's part of that. Okay, of course you see you cannot see it just in terms of linguistics. Okay, you cannot just see it in terms of exercise of your uh, energy that you invest in your research, a PhD or MPhil research. That is there. But then you see, it was more than that because it concerned your own identity also. As I have told you earlier, that most of these retrieval narratives actually were concerned with the identity of the self. Who am I? What kind of identity do I have? Am I really, what kind of caste do I have? Am I a Brahmin? Am I a Kshatriya? Am I a Chamar? What kind of identity do I have or did I have originally? So these are the things which needed to be investigated. And so far as language is concerned, Bhojpuri language is concerned, for example, Bhojpuri is spoken of there mainly. So it is also an exercise in finding what kind of language was there and what kind of people they were. So, and how it has been transformed in the course of the journey and in the course of settlement in a different place of a different place in a different diasporic space. So it is not only about language and culture, but it is also about who you are, about your identity, your family identity, your community identity. No, there is a question about the Brahmins, whether they were forced to leave, whether they were coerced to leave. No, not everyone. Okay, there some may have been trapped. For example, many women who are Brahmin, they were trapped by the Arkatis, but there are many men who are not forced to leave. They left because of poverty, for example, okay, or because of any other reasons like jealousy, like loss of property, okay, so material reasons. So all these people came to Calcutta some way or other and left for the plantation centers, plantation economies, because they wanted money, and they had more or less they had the dream that they would come back one day to India again. But it was quite problematic because the Kalapani crossing was there. If they come back, the people may not accept him. So not all the Brahmin were forced to leave. So you see that that was one point. Okay, many were but many women were forced to flee because they fled the sati, for example. They were no longer, they were destitute because they were no longer required in the family because they were childless, or they didn't produce the male children, or it was a patriarchal society, highly patriarchal feudal society, or they had huge properties which the relatives wanted to grab. So there were different kinds of reasons for which they were coerced to live. They were forced to live. But there were many people also who were not forced to live. Okay. So I think I have given you the answer. Uh, any other question?
Sir, I think all the questions have been answered.
Okay.
So it is time to bid valediction to you. Let me tell you that tomorrow we are going to have Professor Nivedita Mukherjee from Sidhu Kanu Birsa University, Purulia, and Akram Muhammad Ali Al-Kwazi from Yemen. And we shall meet virtually tomorrow at 12 sharp. So I think let us call it a day. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Himadri sir, for giving time to us and enlightening
Thank you very
us.
much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
We are indebted to you. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, the audience. Okay. Goodbye.
Goodbye. Bye. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Bye,
you.
sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Bye. 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 Nice meeting you all.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you very
Bye.
much,
Bye.
sir.
Bye. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.